Everyone wants to live an inspired life, yet so many people search for happiness following the footsteps of peers and taking advice from people who have different values and outcomes to which they're searching. There are people born into wealth, graduated from the best universities in the world, and there are people who have none of that and yet are living extraordinary lives full of fulfillment and reward. The purpose of this podcast is to share insights and strategies that allow you to question the status quo and think freely, so you can design your life and be who you want to be. We get one life. Time is our most valuable asset. I believe that when we're free and able to focus on meaningful work, we become better human beings. This is Always Free, and I'm your host, Jason Greystone.
Welcome to the leading podcast for financial empowerment and wealth creation. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can connect with Jason on social media and subscribe to the Jason Greystone YouTube channel for weekly videos. Don't forget to also subscribe to the weekly newsletter to receive frequent educational content and action steps to help you design your life so you can be who you want to be. For news on all future events and updates, go to jasongreystone.com.
Alright guys, welcome back to the podcast. Hope you've had a great week so far. If you're listening in for the first time, as always, give the little like button a tickle and give this thing a rating. You're in the best place. You're listening to the number one podcast for financial empowerment and wealth creation. And this podcast has been doing phenomenally well, considering it was something that span off of a newsletter that I created, and the newsletter I wasn't even going to write. I'm so glad I did. I get feedback daily telling me how the principles of Always Free are really making a difference in people's lives. So give this thing a little, a rating and a review on iTunes. It'd be much appreciated. Help us keep us at the top spot. And I know I say it every week, but I'll continue to say it until everyone does it. So, welcome back. I hope you've had a nice week. I've got quite a lot to talk about this week because I've kind of been having conversations with people and writing down lots of different ideas. And, I don't plan these podcasts per se. I kind of just have a load of little ideas and notes, and I jot them down and I put them in the notes on my phone, and then I kind of have some bullet points to run through in the episodes, and people seem to enjoy it. So to this week really kind of led in, I was having conversations with someone about last week's podcast, funnily enough, because I spoke about pulling my son out of school, and I also, and if you haven't listened to that, obviously go and listen to episode 13, which is why I pulled my son out of school. And I also spoke about credit card, using credit cards sensibly. And obviously I got onto the conversation of debt and all the rest of it. So this week, I want to talk a little bit about debt and what a trap that is, and just wealth creation in general, and how we can build habits, the right habits, and not overwhelming habits, just the right habits, because habits are essential to success in anything, in my opinion. So I want to talk a bit about habits, and whilst I remember, next week's episode, so episode 15, is going to be all about goal planning. Now, there's a massive difference between setting goals and planning goals, and next week I'm going to share with you a very, very powerful process that's enabled me to, continue to smash my goals every single year, and I'm going to share that with you really in depth next week. So make sure you check out episode 15. But this kind of leads up to it, because this is about the habits, and I want to talk a little bit about habits, because this podcast is about wealth. Okay, it's about wealth mindset, which is, very, very important. And there's wealth accumulation. There's getting your stuff together, getting your act together and accumulating wealth the right way. Then there's acceleration strategies that we go over. And then there's inspiration. There's kind of motivation of taking action and actually implementing the steps, which then obviously builds momentum, because you get encouraged, you get motivated, you get results, you feel enthusiastic, and you're inspired to keep going. And when it boils down to it, I mean, there's really no, it's a bit like growing wealth is just a bit like losing weight. I mean, everyone knows that most people know there's a simple answer to growing wealth. Whether or not they know the ins and outs of kind of the strategies that I share in this podcast, the kind of esoteric strategies that I share, they do know the principles, and they know the principles of losing weight. It's if you want to lose weight, guess what you do? You burn more calories than you consume, and that is it. So, and yet people go out and they, hundreds and hundreds of billions get spent on health and fitness industry trying to buy fad diets and all the rest of it. But it's no different from growing wealth. I mean, it's the same. The principles are the same. You spend less than you earn. You spend less than you earn. You live within your means. And then obviously, you can save 10%, you can put it into investments, you can go on and on. But the principles are very, 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 very simple. Very simple. Now, in this podcast, I've been over various different strategies already. I've talked about accelerated savings, so save a kind of ever-growing portion of your income. I've talked about allocating 10% of your income onto self-development. I've talked about how you should allocate your living expenses. I've talked about automating your banking. I've talked about saving a cash buffer, of your living expenses for 3 to 6 months or as long as you possibly can. I've talked about increasing your income, so how to increase your income by leveraging your systems and growing your income. I've talked about how to grow your income by 10% minimum per year. I've actually told you how to double your income in previous episodes. I've also told you how to invest your savings. We're going to be going a bit deeper into that later on, but about investing those savings, allocating it into low-cost investments, and in future episodes I will be going deeper into that. And then there's about, buying more assets, buying stuff that doesn't depreciate in value. And this week, I'm going to kind of touch on your living expenses. And I've gone over kind of optimizing your living expenses. What I want to talk about is kind of your debt to income ratio. You can look this up. There's something called a debt to income ratio. I'm going to talk about that. Because I was talking to someone the other day about habits, right? And this particular person was a high earner, and they kind of said, "Well, I'm a high earner," and they're actually considered one of the top 10% earners. Okay, which is, I think that's anything above kind of £80,000 or £90,000. It's above that level, and they said they kind of never have any money, right? And once you get to a level where you're working just to repay the bank because you've got lots of debt, which is this person actually had, it's actually quite hard to get. It's quite hard to reach a level of financial independence. So I want to kind of clear up that whole thing. But before I go into how you can kind of calculate, because I always kind of do the action steps at the end, how you can actually calculate that and make sure you're controlling that, and my philosophy on how you should kind of start implementing that, I want to talk a little bit about habits, because it's going to be relevant into how you do that. And I want to talk about habits because a lot of the content in this podcast and a lot of content in the newsletter is about habit creation and change. Obviously, if you've been implementing the steps over this podcast, what I have to realize is, this is a lot to take on. There's a lot of action steps, and you guys are doing lots of different things each week. So you're creating habits. So I kind of just want to talk about that for a bit, because creating a new habit can be a bit of a struggle. And even if the motivation's there to get started, it kind of fades away, and before you've achieved any results at all, and you're back to your old habits. You see that a lot, not just in wealth building, but everything: weight loss, starting a business, all that kind of stuff. So what I want to talk about is a very, very simple way to make any habit stick without even needing that motivation at the beginning or facing those initial struggles, and also create much longer lasting, better results. And I want to talk about something called the Japanese philosophy called Kaizen. Some of you may or may not have heard of this, but it's something I've studied, in great detail, something I've implemented into my life, and I swear by, something I live by. My trading partner, Akil, he also lives by this philosophy as well. And it's called the Kaizen Philosophy. Now, Kaizen is a word meaning continuous improvement. And the actual word actually means change and good, or change and good, or change for good. But when I say change for good or continuous improvement, I mean that in the smallest way possible, even the tiniest little change possible. And the belief was originally explained by a guy called Dr. Edward Deming. And this guy was an American who got involved in the Japanese car manufacturing process after World War II. And he introduced these principles on basically how to improve the quality and the process of manufacturing cars. And we're talking about cars like Toyota and Honda. And what he did, he basically argued against popular belief that change has to be big and bold, in order to have an effect. He basically conceived the idea of the opposite. He said, don't change too much at once. And, it's a bit like, I always say, like the heating. You get people that go, turn the heating on, turn the heating off. And they go to the thermostat and they whack it on and then they whack it off. And it's like this on-off effect rather than just kind of, if you're too hot, just tweak it down half a degree. Leave it half hour. Tweak it down another half a degree and kind of get that control going by doing those little tweaks. And this is kind of what he said. This is the thought process he had. He said, if you don't change too much at once, but instead just focus on very, very small things, extremely small things that can be improved upon every single day. And he basically said, a constant never-ending commitment to consistently increase the quality of the business every single day. And he genuinely believed that this would give the Japanese car manufacturers the power to dominate the entire global automobile market. And he also promised them that within 5 years of using this Kaizen approach, if you like, that they would flood the world with high-quality products. And then he said within 2 decades they'd become one of the world's dominant economic powers. Now, of course, that seemed ridiculous to most people at the time, and he was making all these promises, but all of those small improvements from the bottom of the chain, right through that manufacturing line to the top, eventually had a astronomical effect. And the craziest thing is most of the changes that they put in, they cost hardly anything to implement. So there wasn't anyone that could kind of come up with any type of change that would improve the process massively or cut the time. So what they realised was that, many, many small changes over time created this huge difference. And obviously nowadays, the Japanese cars are, praised for the high quality endurance, the reliability, and, that wasn't always the case. And because of this, it was they revolutionised the whole Japanese manufacturing arm. There's actually a National Deming Prize now, and it's awarded on TV every year and all the rest of it. And, it's this massive thing. And it's all because of this belief that he had just, these tiny little steps over time, these tiny little improvements over time. And I don't know if you've heard, but there's a guy called David Brailsford who was brought on to coach the Sky cycling team for the Tour de France. And they'd never won Tour de France, and they were trying to win Tour de France. And they brought on this guy, and he had a similar philosophy. And the idea was that they'll just make small incremental changes, tiny little changes, the smallest changes possible, but lots of them over time. And each and every day they would improve. And what they did is they were focusing on things like the pressure in the tyres, the softness of the pillows so that they could get better sleeps in the hotel, the hand gels that they were using to stop bacteria and germs, the finest detail, the absolute finest detail, the saddle cushions and just everything. They were focusing on tiny small changes. And not only did they win the Tour de France, they actually won the Olympics just by focusing on those small changes. So they didn't come along and drastically do anything that was like completely changing the team. They just focused on the small changes. So one last example was a guy called Dr. Robert Muller, who demonstrated this through his patients. So instead of asking his patients to completely change, their habits, he followed the principles of Kaizen, and he was asking them to do extremely small, insignificant changes towards what they wanted to achieve. So instead of telling his obese patients to exercise more and eat less, he just said, put your training shoes on and stand still on the treadmill for 30 seconds. And for nutrition, he was saying things like, put one less cube of sugar in your coffee, that's it. Or half a cube. And the most important thing was, right, is these little tiny changes, they were so small that they kind of were so easy to implement that they got rid of that mental barrier that was kind of hindering them from starting in the first place, because people become overwhelmed and they think it's such a big thing. But by breaking it down like that, it's so easy to start, and you kind of overcome this barrier of you don't even feel like you're doing anything. And of course, the patients eventually started to take bigger steps, and they were, on the treadmill walking and, eating healthy. But before that Kaizen principle, before that Kaizen method, the thought of doing all that stuff was just too much. It was just, it trigger a sense of fear and failure and uncertainty, and people just didn't want to start. So I'm going to talk about how habits are important into debt and wealth, but I wanted to share that with you because a lot of I've talked about self-development and all as well, and I get people saying that they don't like reading books. You can apply this philosophy to that as well. Quite often recommend a book to someone and they admit putting it off or, setting it as a low priority because they just see a ton of pages and a load of, they need a load of time to read it. And because of that, they don't even open the book. So what I want you to do, if that's you, just think about it this way. Just open the book. Right? Open the book and look at it. The next day, open the book and read the first few pages. And I bet you'll enjoy it. Reading a few pages only take a few minutes. But just commit to reading 3 pages. Just say to yourself, I'm only going to read 3 pages. And while you've got it in your hand, you might as well open it, read the few pages, and the next thing you know, you're going to finish a chapter. And that's just one example. So what I'm trying to get at, the Kaizen philosophy, and I urge you look it up, go and research the Kaizen philosophy, but it's about making the new habits so small. Like literally standing on a treadmill, then getting off. And the next day, just standing on a treadmill, press start for 10 minutes. Walk very slowly. 5 minutes. And the more you understand that you can build these small habits very, very easily, the more you become motivated, the more you lose that barrier of fear and doubt and uncertainty. So the reason I'm talking about this is because when I was talking to the guy the other day, and I do get this a lot, people always say, this guy was high earner, right? He was massively in debt. He raised his lifestyle, his living expenses with his income, as most people do, and they're no better off than the paper boy that I spoke about in a few episodes ago. And what that is, it's because they've got this little ratio, debt to income ratio. And I'm not going to get kind of all depressive here, but all I want to talk about is this debt to income ratio. Many people spend more than they earn on debts. And I want to give you a way of kind of gauging yourself and where you sit in that kind of spectrum of debt. It's a very, very simple formula. You can go and look this up on Google. I didn't invent it or anything like that. You can type up debt to income ratio and you can find these things everywhere. But it's another tangible thing that you can write down, and I want you to work out where you are, write it on the board, and use this Kaizen philosophy to build habits to start getting yourself out of this. Because the more you get out of this, the more free you're going to feel. So, firstly, the formula is basically this. You basically work out your expenses, your debt repayments per month. So I'm talking about debts here. I'm not talking about living expenses. I'm talking about debt payments. Because people have £500 a month on a car, £600 on a watch, all this crazy stuff. So firstly, work out your expense debt payments per month. Secondly, work out your income per month, which you should know by now. And then lastly, just divide the debt by your income and then multiply by 100. And the reason you multiply by 100 is that gives you a percentage. So let's just give you an example. Let's just say your monthly debt payments are £1,000, okay, which isn't too uncommon. And then let's just say your monthly income is £1,800, okay, which is, that's quite up there. That's quite the ratio of what people are spending on debts. So the calculation would be 1,000 divided by 1,800 times 100. That's 55%. All right, you can do that calculation now just to check, but it's 55%. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a gauge of where I feel you sit in that spectrum, depending on your score. So work out your score, and you'll see on this gauge what level of comfort you're likely to be in terms of running on the hamster wheel or feeling prosperous, feeling independent. So if you scored 10 to 20%, you've absolutely smashed the game. You probably feel really, really good. You've got no debts, hardly any debts, and you feel good. You feel like, you sleep on the pillow at night like a baby. You're out, right? If you score around 20 to 40%, you're good. You're still calm. You're managing. It's no sweat. You're not even breaking out in a sweat, but you certainly don't want any more than that. If you're getting around 40 to 60%, so like in the example I gave, 55%, that usually means you're up to the eyeballs, and that's kind of where this guy was, right? In fact, this guy wasn't there. He was in the next one up. But if you're up to the eyeballs, clear some down, get rid of it, cut up the credit card, pay it down, and I'm going to talk about how habits are used to do that as well in a minute. And if you're in this kind of 60 to 80% range, you're an absolute faker. You're spending money you don't have on crap you don't need to impress people you don't like, and you're stressed as hell for no reason, and you're resentful because you're doing that. You don't want the stuff that you've got. You're doing it to impress other people, and you're spending way more than you earn, or pretty much what you earn, and you are stressed. And then if you're higher than that, obviously 80 to 100%, you're basically a slave to the bank. You go to work every day. You're working for the cash machine. You pay bank interest fees. You keep going overdrawn. You're a hamster on a wheel, and that level is extremely hard to get off if you don't do something about it immediately. Immediately, you're being run by your lifestyle. Your lifestyle is running you. And remember, financial independence isn't about being rich. It's about being wealthy, which means you have time. Okay? And you can accelerate your journey to financial independence by checking this debt to income ratio. Make sure you stay, 40% and below kind of thing. The absolute maximum should be 40%. So check yours. And what I said to this guy was, I said, this is basically your debt to income ratio. And I think he was about, 78% or something it worked out. And this guy was earning 90 grand a year and is about 78% on the debt to income ratio. And I said, and what he said to me was what a lot of people say. They say, yeah, as soon as I've, when I've paid my debts down, I'll start saving and investing. When I start, when I start doing that, I'll start saving. To which my advice always on that is start saving straight away, right? Even if you're in debt. So if you've got debts and you've got credit card debts and you've got bank loans and all that stuff, if you have got debts, start knocking off the ones, the biggest debts first, okay? Knock off the ones with the highest interest rates. Don't pay down the little ones, forget them, pay the big ones, get them big ones down, pay them down. The ones with the higher interest rates, pay them down. So write down a list, write down a hierarchy, a list in terms of the highest debt, the biggest interest rate, and put them in a spreadsheet, put them in order, and start knocking them things off by building these small habits. But if you're listening to this and you've been listening now for 15 weeks or 14 weeks, whatever it is, and you've been saying this to yourself, oh, I'll start doing this when I've got no debt. That won't happen. It's so important that you build the habit of saving and investing now. The habit's what's important. Okay, and when people say, oh yeah, but I haven't got any money to save, and I say, well, have you got a pound? And they say, well, yeah, well, do that. £1. Save £1. It's the habit that you need to build rather than, the amount of money. And I'll tell you why it will never happen if you keep just saying you're going to do it when you've got a bit more money or you're out of debt. You need to do it now, because what will happen is, at the moment, you feel stressed. Okay, depending on where you are on that debt to income ratio, you're probably stressed, you're probably feeling a bit of a squeeze, and you feel scarce, you're in scarcity mode, you don't want to spend any money. So what you're doing is you're letting the lifestyle control you, and you don't want to put any money into savings or invest. It's a last priority for you. However, when you start paying down that debt and you put these little habits in place and you stop taking the coffee, the Kaizen philosophy could be stop going to Costa or Starbucks, stop going to walk to work once a week instead of taking the car. Inflate your tires, make sure they're inflated so the kind of the pressure doesn't consume more fuel, have more fuel consumption than when they're fully pumped up. But when you start doing that and you start paying these debts down, what you're going to do is your animal brain will relax a little bit. You'll start feeling a bit more frivolous. You'll get down to, level balance, okay? And what you'll do is you'll start feeling good. And at that point, you'll start thinking, what can you'll see £7,000 on the credit card and you go, what can I buy now? And you'll go and buy something else and you'll up that debt. I've talked about the financial thermostat before. You'll want to get into debt again. What you need to do is start getting into the habit of paying yourself first, and I mean investing in yourself. Even if that saving and investment account goes into investing in yourself, an Audible membership or in your business, or whether it's into a low-cost index fund or just into a savings account. Get into the habit of saving first. Habits. Build the habit. And it doesn't have to be massive. Remember, if you've got £1, put it in there. But make sure it's automated. Make sure it is a habit that you do regularly. That's why habits are important. That's why I shared with you the Kaizen philosophy. It's something I've studied for many years. It's something that I've implemented into all areas of my life, really. Even to the degree where I kind of I have a reminder to text certain people just to keep that relationship going, because we can all, and I'm not saying that I forget about these people, but I'm saying that life, sometimes we put things off. But if a reminder comes up and tells you to do it, you stop what you're doing, you do the thing, and the habit's there, and it helps with the relationship. These tiny little habits can have a massive effect, a massive impact on your life. Don't wait until you've got tons of money or you come out of debt before you start saving. Do it now. Work out your debt to income ratio so you've got something tangible and you've got something on the board to go and work towards. And remember, there's no secret formula. It's very easy. We all know the principles. If you follow the principles inside Always Free and this podcast and the newsletter, it will transform your life. It will change your life. I guarantee it. So do that. Let me know how you got on, and I look forward to seeing you next week. By the way, I must say that as of today, we've just launched a brand new website called alwaysfreepodcast.com. And the purpose of that podcast is it acts as a hub for this podcast. People coming to me asking where they can kind of, where they can subscribe. Is it on YouTube? Is it on TuneIn? Is it on iTunes? So we've built a hub, which is you can go to that one website and listen to these podcasts. Every podcast is on the site. You can also subscribe to all the different channels. Whatever channel you like is on there. And you can kind of keep interacting with me on there as well. Oh, and just before we finish off, I just remembered I want to recommend a book because it's very, very relative to this episode on incremental changes, small changes, and the effects that have over time. And that's a book called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. It's going to be a life changer for you. It's going to be a game changer for you. Go and grab that book. That's it for this week, guys. Until next week, have a great rest of your day and weekend, and I'll see you next week.
Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. For news on all future events and updates, go to jasongreystone.com.